Have you all ever heard of Monster High? I'm assuming you have if you clicked on this video, but if you haven't, let me fill you in real quick. In 2010, toy designer Garrett Sanders, in collaboration with Mattel, created the Monster High series of dolls. The doll line's premise centers around the children of famous monsters and pop culture icons attending a school for monsters. Some of these monsters include, but are not limited to, Frankie Stein, the daughter of Frankenstein's monster, Draculaura, the daughter of Dracula, Claudine Wolf, a sassy werewolf, or Cleo Denial, a mean girl mummy. The franchise was a massive success for Mattel in the early 2010s, leading to them creating various forms of media to complement the dolls. There are diaries, video games, a web series, a short anime, believe it or not, and 13 direct-to-DVD specials. Today, I thought it would be cool to revisit these films and rank them based on how much I enjoyed them. If you want me to talk about the webisodes, let me know down in the comments. Also, as a forewarning, I will not be including the Gen 2 animated movies or the Generation 3 live-action films. I've seen the former, and I certainly have some thoughts on G2 as a whole, but the live-action movies I have not seen, and I can't say that I will see them. In future, I might make a follow-up video on this one covering the G2 movies. With that out of the way, let's get to the ranking. Being the first ever piece of Monster High media, New Ghoul School certainly has a unique charm to it. I saw parts of other movies when I was younger, but this one was my proper introduction to the series. And how was it?
Hey, what's up, Monster High?
It was something. 15 days old, Frankie Stein arrives at Monster High, where she tries to become a popular girl. However, she soon finds out that high school is a lot harder than she imagined. Let me start out with my positives on this film. I love the intro. The Frights song is probably the most iconic song of the franchise, so I'm always glad to hear it. The little character description cards that pop up when a new ghoul is introduced are charming as well.
That bites.
This is a little backhanded, but there are a lot of funny looking shots in this film. My favorite has to be the sad top-down perspective shot of Frankie during the second montage. I mean, just look at her. Why does she look like that? Speaking of the montages, the songs that play during them are great as well. Both written by singer-songwriter Allison Aretta. Scars and Friday I'll Be Over You help add to the unique vibe of this film. Another aspect of this movie is the amount of dated references. It's like almost painfully early 2010s.
Favorite singer? Justin Bieber, of course. In fact, my dad practically resurrected his career. Justin rules.
Frankie also reads a lot of teen magazines, which really takes me back to the time when people actually read those. Another thing I like are some of the jokes. Draculaura in particular had a line that got a laugh out of me.
Feeling fierce, charged, and ready. ROTFLON. Rolling on the floor laughing out loud? I don't get it. I read it somewhere.
And of course, how could I talk about this film without talking about the Dawn of the Dance outfits? These are great. My favorites are probably Cleo and Claudine's. I love the blue in Cleo's outfit, and I'm a big fan of the purple and green combo on Claudine. On to the negatives. My biggest complaint with this movie is that its plot is kinda generic. I know that first entries in a franchise are usually a time for testing the waters, figuring out what works. But for a Monster High movie, the story doesn't feel all too monstrous. None of the characters' monster traits really affect anything in the plot outside of a few monster puns. You could honestly rewrite the movie with everyone as humans, and it wouldn't change much about the story. Another more minor complaint I have with this movie is the animation. It can be very janky at points, and some sequences just look incredibly awkward. Mainly the fear-leading dance scene. There's also an issue I have as well with the character models. A lot of the characters have inconsistent appearances between the different angles of their rigs. This will get fixed as the webisodes will go on, so it's not that big of a deal. Overall, New Ghoul School is an enjoyable watch with funny moments and a banger soundtrack, but it's not really the best introduction to the characters or the world, and there are definitely better stories Monster High has to offer. When Headmistress Bloodgood decides to merge all Vampire School, Belfry Prep, and all Werewolf School, Crescent Moon High, into Monster High, the ghouls struggle to deal with the tensions between the two species. Meanwhile, it seems a conspirator is working in the background to foil Bloodgood's efforts. My opinions on this one are complicated. I mainly have negative things to say about it, but for the sake of fairness, let me start off positive. The animation is a major improvement this time around. The new characters and the outfits the main ghouls wear look fantastic. I've always preferred the 2D style of the webisodes to the 3D movies, so it's nice to get another movie with that look. With the positives out of the way, let's get on to my complaints. I'm about to do a heavy amount of overanalyzing for a kids movie, but you all are already watching this video, so you signed up for my yapping. My main issue with this movie is the conflict between the vampires and the werewolves. The vampires and the werewolves are supposed to be seen as equally wrong, two sides of the same coin, but from what is shown in the movie, it seems like the vampires are the ones causing most of the problems. For example,
"It's not your fault. Vampires have been doing that stuff to our people for thousands of years."
Sure, the werewolves may be mean and exclusionary towards the vampires, but is it entirely unjustified based on the information presented throughout this film? My last major issue I have with this movie is Frankie being the one to solve the conflict. Monster High really likes to use Frankie as an unbiased outsider looking in. Due to her being only 15 days old, she has a different perspective on issues than those around her. But I feel here, it would have been far more interesting for Claudine and Draculaura to be the ones to stop the vampire-werewolf conflict. They each come from the opposing species, yet they're still best friends. It would have been interesting to see their relationship tested, and they come out on top. But instead, they decided to do that with Claude and Draculaura's relationship for some reason. It's also odd how it's Claudine and Draculaura on the cover, but the movie's not really about them. Also, for some reason, it's in a 3D style, even though this movie is 2D. Does anyone else find that weird, or is it just me? Overall, while this film isn't the worst Monster High has to offer, it's not very good either. The first 3D Monster High movie, Why Do Ghouls Fall in Love, is a widely beloved film in the franchise, and I can certainly see why. This movie introduces fan-favorite characters like Kieran Valentine and C.A. Cupid, who would later transfer over to Ever After High. I love that series, by the way. If you want me to talk about it, let me know. There's a lot to like about this movie. The film is very well paced, and it doesn't feel like it drags at any points. It only has 2 plot lines compared to Fright On's 3, and as mentioned before, the new characters introduced in this one are very memorable and fun to watch. And while I prefer the style of the webisodes, the 3D look does have its charm here. Many characters actually look a lot better in the 3D style compared to 2D. I've never liked how characters like Torlai and Operetta's hair look in the web series, especially Operetta, who in the web series has this weird lunch lady hair that looks nothing like her doll. The 3D style sticks a lot closer to the look of the dolls, which is a great improvement for those characters, but some look worse. 2 that come to mind for me are Claudine and Spectra. In the webisodes and character art, Claudine's hair is very wavy and distinct in its shape. Likewise, Spectra's hair in the key art is very floaty due to her being a ghost. But in the transition to 3D, both these characters lose those traits. Now, on to the negatives. My biggest complaint with this film was how Draculaura acted. I'm not one to get angry when characters do bad things in a movie and call it bad writing, but it's very weird how quickly Draculaura went back to Valentine. I know he had been using his magic on her in the past, but I figured after the amount of time it has been since they last talked, it would have worn off by now. Either way, it was a really bad thing of Draculaura to do while still dating Claude, and it doesn't reflect well on her. Besides that, I only have two minor complaints. First, I found Frankie's narration throughout the movie to be annoying. She's not really describing anything that you couldn't get by just looking at the screen and seeing what the characters are doing.
Cupid was going to shoot Draculaura with an arrow, which would make her fall in love with the first monster she saw, and we were going to make sure that monster was Claude.
But it's a kid's movie, so it's whatever. My other complaint is that Ghoulia's subplot with Heath isn't very interesting. I'm a big fan of both of these characters, particularly Ghoulia, so I feel like they could have gotten something more interesting to do than what they did here. To sum things up, Why Do Ghouls Fall in Love, while flawed, is a fun film that really captures the spirit of Monster High. It's spring break at Monster High, and Laguna invites Gil and all the ghouls to the Great Barrier Reef, later renamed to the Great Scarrier Reef. However, things go awry when their ship is sunk, and they are rescued by the mysterious Bartleby Farnham. Arriving on Skull Shores, the ghouls quickly realize that something is afoot, and a beast lurks in the shadows. This is probably the movie I have the least to say about. I've never been the biggest fan of this one in both of my watch-throughs. There are things I like about it. I like the plotline of the scientist that looked like Frankie, and I liked Andy Beast, who has a cool design and really should have appeared more. But besides that, I found the movie to just be kind of boring. Once they get to the island, it feels like the story just kind of slows to a halt. I also don't care for Laguna and Gil's relationship drama. The subject has been covered so many times in the webisodes by this point that I just didn't care to see it again. I feel like I'm being pretty uncharitable towards this movie, but I'm just not a fan of it. Sorry. This entry will probably be very brief as well. The best way to describe Friday Night Frights for me would be fun. The plot of this one centers around the ghouls competing in a roller derby tournament to win back their school's emblem. The game is called Skulltimate Roller Maze, or Scream for short. They're joined by Operetta, who is initially hard to work with. Meanwhile, Ghoulia discovers the parts to a long-lost robot in the arena. There's a lot that I like about this movie. The roller derby sequences in this are engaging, and the ensemble cast works well together in this movie. You also have the introduction of fan-favorite characters Rochelle Goyle and Rebecca Steam, who both have incredible designs. It was also nice to have Operetta play a role in this one. I've always liked her character in the webisodes and wish she got featured in more movies. Well, except for one of them. That's everything covered in terms of positives. For negatives, I really don't have anything major to say. Claude's kinda sexist in this one, but that might be in character for him. That's up for debate. Overall, this movie's still pretty solid. It's Halloween at Monster High, and the students learn of the holiday's true history and the long-running feud between monsters and humans. Upset at this, Frankie seeks to quell the tensions between the two groups, but not everyone agrees with this idea, however, and some monsters form a group to take Halloween back from the humans. This was my favorite movie in my first watch through, but when I rewatched it, it just didn't hold up as well as I thought. I'm just gonna go ahead and get all my negatives out of the way, since that's the majority of what I have to say about this one. This movie feels kind of bloated. You have the plot with Jackson and Holt, the plot with Frankie and her group, the plot with Cleo's family problems, and you have the plot with Draculaura and Claudine. This is the first of the hour-long films in the series, so I think they wanted to add more plot lines in order to reach the runtime, but it just kind of led to some of them feeling half-baked. In particular, I'm not a fan of the plotline with Claudine and Draculaura. Draculaura is trying to get Claudine to date, and Claudine doesn't really want to, but Draculaura keeps pushing it and pushing it. But at the end of the movie, they have Claudine apologize and get with some random guy, which is just, okay. Cleo's plot with Deuce as well is also kinda weak. Her family doesn't approve of Deuce and wants her to get a new man, but I just feel like it didn't really fit here with this movie, kind of distracted from the main plot. I think Boo York did a better job of tackling this relationship, but I'm not the biggest fan of that plotline in that movie either. Lilith Van Helscream is introduced in this movie, seemingly as the main antagonist. But once Holt is captured and they say he's going to be executed, she suddenly swaps sides, which I found to be weird. As a monster hunter, surely you know what's going to happen if you capture monsters. I mean, what was she thinking they were going to do with him? Just lock him up? But yeah, that's all my problems with this movie out of the way. Let me talk about the things I did like. The new outfits for this movie were interesting, though they're not my favorites. Editing me here, I didn't realize how much it sounded like I didn't like these outfits until I listened back to this clip. I like them. They're not my favorites, but when I said they're not my favorites, it sounded like I was hating. But before I get back to the video, can we just talk about how, like, bad the commercial for this one was?
And Cleo.
The stuff involving Jackson and Holt at the school was fun to watch, and new characters Chad and Claire were welcome additions. I especially love Chad's little dance he does. They even had it in the G3 cartoon. And finally, I love the dance party at the end. There's one shot in particular that I like, where Andy, Cupid, and Kipling are dancing together on the steps. I just think it's neat because they were all introduced in the movies as secondary characters, and they're always placed in background shots together, which is cool. To sum up, Ghouls Rule is an okay movie. There were aspects of it that I enjoyed, but it feels bloated with too many plot lines and slow pacing that highlights the new hour length of these films. I know I said that Skull Shores would be the one I'd have the least to say about, but it very well might be Scaris. The plot of Scaris involves Claudine earning an apprenticeship from Monatella Ghostier, famous fashion designer. She brings the main ghouls, along with Rochelle Goyle and Torelei, who snuck on the flight. At the apprenticeship, Claudine meets new ghouls Jennifer Long and Scalita Calaveras. Though initially excited to be under her tutelage, Ghostier's critiques wear Claudine down. Meanwhile, Frankie and Rochelle search the city looking for Rochelle's long-lost partner, whose disappearance is revealed to have ties to Ghostier. This movie is just alright to me. I don't really have much negative to say about it, compared to movies like Fright On or Ghouls Rule, but it's just never been super interesting to me. The new characters Jennifer and Scalita have cool designs, but I've never been super fans of either of them. I think the movie is well structured, having only 3 plot lines that all converge together in a satisfying way at the end. But again, it's just not really my thing. Also, for some reason, this movie ends around 45 minutes in, and the last 15 minutes is just a random short film about the ghouls chasing Claudine's journal around the world. It's extremely random. Anyway, I can see why this could be someone's favorite movie, but it's just not really my thing. We're finally getting to one of my favorite movies. When Howleen discovers a magic lamp in Monster High's attic, Genie Gigi Grant provides her with 13 wishes. However, these wishes have a dark side, as with every wish, Gigi's evil sister Wisp corrupts Howleen further and further. If she's not stopped, Wisp will use Howleen's last wish to gain world domination. It's up to the ghouls and new character Twyla Boogeyman to put a stop to Wisp's plan. This movie is a lot of fun. I've always been a fan of Aladdin, so I love me a good genie story. The new characters introduced here are great as well. Twyla in particular is my favorite Monster High character, so I'm very much biased towards this movie in that regard. I heavily relate to her introverted nature and overall chill demeanor. Other new characters, Gigi and Wisp, are great as well. Wisp makes for a fun antagonist, and in the scenes where she almost gains her full form, she's animated in a very funny way that I kind of liked. Caddy Noir also makes her first appearance in this movie, singing a song at the end of movie obligatory dance party. The outfits for this movie are on point as well. I really like the genie fashion. However, there's one look I don't like, which is Laguna's, but I'll get to that later. 13 Wishes is the first film to utilize We Are Monster High as its intro, replacing the Fright song for every movie going forward. I'm a big fan of this change. It took a while for this song to grow on me at first, but now I find myself listening to it often. To coincide with the song change, this movie gets a brand new intro with unique visuals, a trend that will continue for the rest of the G1 films. The opening sequence looks great, telling the story of how the lamp was passed down through the generations and eventually ending up at Monster High. 13 Wishes would hold the title for Best Monster High Intro if it weren't for the next film on this list. In terms of plot lines, this movie's pretty good. I like the main plot with Gigi, Howleen, and Wisp, but there are also other plots that I enjoyed. Claude, Heath, and Manny being on the stunt show was funny, and it reminded me of the days when I was a kid watching Wipeout. Abby, of course, is always humorous, so her subplot was naturally funny. Speaking of Abby, this is the last movie in which she plays a major role, which is honestly a shame. Besides those plots, there was one that I was not a fan of. I already mentioned before how I don't like when Laguna and Gil's relationship drama takes center stage. It's always the same beat being repeated over and over about how Gil's parents won't accept Laguna because she's not a freshwater monster. It's not a bad plot in of itself, but when that's all they do with these two characters, I just can't find myself caring about them. In this film, Laguna gets a new design as a freshwater monster due to Howleen's wish, and she just acts really odd the whole rest of the movie and gets these weird uncanny faces. I don't know, man. I think Laguna deserved better. She pretty much got shafted once Abby was introduced in the webisodes, and now she only gets plots about her drama with Gil. It's just unfortunate. Anyways, despite that rant on Laguna's character, I still really like this movie. After all, it has the most goated Monster High character ever, Twyla Boogeyman. Shout out Twyla. Feeling ashamed about the fact that she hasn't gotten her vampire powers, Draculaura gets a shocking surprise when the Prime Minister of Vampires, Bram Stoker, pays her a visit. Using a special vampire artifact that locates the Queen of Vampires, Stoker informs Draculaura that she is the new queen. However, Draculaura quickly discovers that the heart Stoker used was a fake, and that the real queen is still out there. Fueled with a newfound determination, Draculaura goes with her ghouls, Cleo, Claudine, and Rebecca in search of the vampire heart and the true queen. Hoodoo tags along as well. Let's start off with the intro. This intro is my favorite of all the G1 films. I absolutely love the references with the movie posters. Ghoulia gets a Scott Pilgrim one, Claudine gets a reference to the Hunger Games, and Hoodoo gets an Indiana Jones poster. Side tangent, did you know that in Hoodoo's poster, the tombstone in the back reads RIP FS? This is a nod to the fact that in the next film, Freaky Fusion, Frankie dies. That's a funny little Easter egg. In terms of the characters, I'd say this film does a good job. This is Draculaura's feature movie. I don't count Why Do Ghouls Fall in Love because she was not really a character in that one. But yeah, regardless, I've never been the biggest Draculaura fan. She doesn't have as strong a personality compared to the rest of the main ghouls, and her appearances don't often do much to add to that. But here, this film sort of rectifies that as she gets a very interesting arc. Initially, Draculaura was ecstatic about being the vampire queen and happily accepted the role. But as soon as she learned that she wasn't the actual queen, she immediately took initiative and dedicated herself to finding the real vampire queen. And it pays off, as she finds Elizabeth and finally gets her vampire powers. This movie did a good job of making me like Draculaura and makes me appreciate her character going forward. Other characters like Cleo and Claudine pretty much stay the same. Rebecca's theme features heavily in this movie, as we learn more about her father, Hezekiah's theme, her origins, and her tie to the vampire heart. Hoodoo Voodoo also plays a big role in this movie, which I liked. He adds a nice goofy energy to the group, and his love of Veronica Von Vamp was cute. There are also new characters introduced in this film. The most popular is Elizabeth, childhood friend of Draculaura and the real vampire queen. She was lined up to become the next queen, but ran away, as she knew her uncle Bram Stoker would manipulate her for political power. In her new life, she became actress Veronica Von Vamp, and the film keeps her true identity a secret throughout most of its duration. However, if you're above like the age of 9, it's extremely obvious that she's Elizabeth, but I digress. Elizabeth's design is beautiful. I love her deep purple clothes and hair, and her outfit is on point. I don't collect dolls, but her and Twyla's designs genuinely made me consider it. More new characters, Claudia Wolf, Viperine Gorgon, and Honey Swamp are introduced in this one as well. Claudia is a screenwriter and the older sister of Claude, Claudine, and Howleen. Viperine is a makeup artist who works with Elizabeth and is also the cousin of Deuce Gorgon. And Honey Swamp is a director from the Bayou. I really like her design, I love the afro hair, we support black queens around here. But yeah, all these characters are chill with cool designs, and it's nice that they all find their place in Hauntleigh. You know who's not nice though? Bram Stoker. He's probably the worst part of this movie. It really makes no sense why everyone is so scared of him throughout the film. He doesn't seem to have any specific powerful abilities like Valentine, and at the end of the movie, he's scared of being arrested by regular police officers. It would have been better if he was more intimidating so he could feel like a real threat to the main cast. There's also a subplot of this movie which is a play on 2010's Twilight discourse. All the ghouls who aren't on the adventure argue over the vampires from the movie in the opening, Alucard and Edweird. They eventually go to Cute Court with the goat Twyla as the judge. However, what no one realizes is that they are the same dude. I thought this was funny at first, but then they just kept repeating the joke with Gil calling attention to it over and over again.
What are they arguing about? I can't even tell those dudes apart.
Sorry, I'm on Team Edward. There's just something special there that Alucard doesn't have.
I don't even know which one you're talking about.
Edward is so much cute.
No one else thinks they look alike? Don't they seem the same to you guys? I still say they look the same.
Totally called it.
Yep.
Same dude.
I knew it! And they called me crazy!
Alright, I get it!
Overall, Frights camera action is a pretty good movie that gives some much needed spotlight to Draculaura. I'm just gonna get this out of the way. This is my favorite Monster High movie, no contest. Out of all the movies I watched during my rewatch, I probably enjoyed this one the most. But despite saying that, this movie has some major problems with its story. But I'll get to those later. Let me start off positive. The new characters in this movie, while they don't get much to do, are very entertaining. Nathan is a chill dude, despite having a very weird design and origin. Bonita Femur and Avia Trotter look good as well, but Cyrena Von Boo is probably my favorite. I just love bubbly airheaded characters. Their vibe speaks to me in a way.
You got distracted again. No, I just... Oh, hey. Are you gonna finish those?
This movie features Victor Frankenstein, also called Sparky, as the sort of antagonist of the special. His and Frankie's plotline is the best part of this movie. It's really interesting seeing Frankie go back in time and meet her grandpa, while she's unaware of that fact. The movie tries to keep it a mystery, but like the Elizabeth twist, if you're not a child, you're gonna figure it out immediately. Victor's origin is really fascinating to me. An orphan who desperately wants a family, so he's gonna make his own by any means necessary. Him coming to realize that love is the key to creating life, not just technology, was sweet, and he leaves the film a better person. A semi-new character who appears in this movie is Hezekiah's theme. Mentioned in the previous movie, we finally get to see what he looks like and hear his voice. His appearance was cool, and him meeting Rebecca was another sweet moment. The biggest throughline and strength of this movie is its theme of bonds. The bonds between Frankie and her friends, her and her grandpa, and Rebecca and Hezekiah. The third act culminates this throughline with the ghouls teaming up to defeat Victor's rampaging monster, and in a shocking turn of events, Frankie dies. I know she comes back to life shortly after, but it really caught me off guard. If I was a kid, I probably would have been bawling my eyes out. Everyone repays Frankie for her sacrifice, combining all of their love for her into a method to bring her back to life. She even gets a new look so kids can go buy a new doll. But yeah, the third act of this movie is its strongest part, and really saves the movie from its worst elements. This is a good time to talk about this film's biggest problem, the fusions. The fusions are probably the most blatant merchandising tie they've done in these movies, besides Great Scary Reef. They really add nothing to the story, and their plotline isn't very interesting at all. I'm sure the angle they were going for was for the ghouls to understand the experience of the hybrids, having multiple freaky flaws, but it doesn't really translate over well. Fusions are two monsters sharing a body, and hybrids are just combinations of two different monster types. It's really not the same lived experience, and it doesn't work super well as a parallel. There's also the issue of the pairs they chose. Cleo and Toralei make sense as a pairing since they have personal beef, but the rest of them are just kinda odd. Venus and Claudine don't have any issues with each other. I mean, Venus doesn't really have any character at all, so how could she? Draculaura and Rebecca get a thing where they lack assertiveness, but they just had a movie together and that wasn't a problem there. Laguna and Jennifer, do I even have to say anything? I mean, come on. Overall, the fusions are just weird conceptually and poorly executed. Despite me taking massive issue with the fusions, the rest of the movie is great, with a stellar third act that cancels out all my problems with it. When Draculaura says that she's being haunted, Spectra immediately heads to the ghost world to find out who is responsible, not wanting to leave their best ghost friend behind. Claudine, Draculaura, Rochelle, and Twyla follow her to this other dimension. In this world, the ghouls arrive at Haunted High, Spectra's old school. Here, they discover a conspiracy involving the principal that threatens their friends back at home. This movie is very unique in the fact that it's the first to not focus on a main cast member. All the other movies either focused on an individual ghoul from the main group, or all of them as an ensemble. Instead, this movie focuses on Spectra, which I welcome greatly. She's always been one of my favorite characters, and her design is top tier. In this film, she gets an arc about how her tendency to spread gossip can cause harm to people, and the power of propaganda. It's a pretty interesting topic for a kids movie to cover. At the start of this film, she's so keen for a story that she happily accepts misinformation from Toralei, but throughout this film, she sees the power that lies can have, and ends the film renouncing her old ways, which is pretty good development for her. Besides Spectra, this movie has a pretty good selection of characters. Rochelle, Twyla, and Cyrene are all part of the main cast this time around, all characters who I'm fond of. Draculaura and Claudine tag along as well. New to this movie is Kiyomi Haunterly, Vandala Doubloons, River Styx, and Porter Geist. All are very well designed, and play a relevant role in the story, unlike some other Monster High new characters. Kiyomi is a sweet, faceless ghost who is the one haunting Draculaura. River Styx is the daughter of the Grim Reaper, and helps guide the ghouls to Haunted High. Vandala Doubloons is a pirate with a ship. And Porter Geist is a chill dude, who gets paired with Spectra throughout this movie. I usually don't care for romance plots in these films, but I'd say they were cute together here. Haunted's biggest strength, I feel, is its focus. The cast is very tight, only having a few previously established characters and a relatively small number of newcomers. Side plots are few and far between in this entry as well, with the film choosing to keep its attention on the main plot. Any side plots that do exist, however, tie well into the main narrative. For example, Draculaura's plotline of being haunted by Kiyomi pays off with Kiyomi helping to open portals back to Monster High. This helps the movie to not feel overcrowded, despite introducing new characters. This film also does a good job not including characters that would be unnecessary to the plot. Frankie, Cleo, Gulia, and Laguna all take a back seat here to allow more room for the new characters to shine. To sum up, Haunted does a good job balancing its cast and plot lines. Though I just spent a bunch of time praising the movie, it's not without its faults. The villain, Principal Revenant, is built up as the central antagonist throughout the movie, and is eventually revealed to have been the Red Lady. She punishes the students without a second thought, and is shown to be entirely selfish. However, at the end of the film, Spectra's speech manages to convince her to be good again, which I didn't find believable. If they wanted to have her reformed, they really should have planted the seeds for a redemption earlier on in the movie. It's made even worse by the fact that the students just openly accept her back as principal, despite her having kept them in chains for so long. But it's a kids movie, so what else was I expecting? Overall, Haunted is a pretty good special, with a very tightly written story and an interesting cast of characters. It handles its plot threads well and avoids the bloating that plagues most other Monster High films. When Cleo's dad invites her and Nephra to the Comet Crystal Gala, she decides to invite Deuce, Frankie, Claudine, Draculaura, Operetta, and Caddy Noir to come with her, who's been struggling with songwriter's block. I have a lot of thoughts about this film, and they're not all positive. My biggest complaint with the movie is how overstuffed it is. There are honestly far too many characters in this movie for it to have the time to properly pay off. You have Cleo, Deuce, Frankie, Claudine, Operetta, and Caddy Noir, but you also have Nephra, Ramses the Nile, the Ptolemies, and Toralei. Then the movie also introduces new characters, Luna Matthews, LED, Mercedes King, and Astronova. The film honestly struggles greatly trying to give these characters all their fair share. Most egregiously, why is Operetta even there? She doesn't do anything that the other ghouls couldn't have done, and the new outfit she gets in this movie isn't that great either. I mean, why did they get rid of her mask? It's just weird. Besides the characters, this movie has too many plot lines as well. You've got the plotline with Cleo and Deuce, the plotline with Caddy and Pharaoh, the plotline with Ramses and Nephra, Ghoulie and Abby tracking the Comet Crystal, which is actually a spaceship. It's just trying to do far too much. That was a lot of negativity, so let me balance it out by talking about what I liked. Something unique about this movie is that it was the first Monster High movie to be a musical. Other movies had featured songs near the end or in montages, but Boo York is the first to have the characters themselves singing. When I first watched this movie, I didn't really like any of the songs. I immediately caught on to the fact that they only had one male singer and one female singer, so I couldn't listen to the songs without thinking of that fact. But on my rewatch, I found myself enjoying the songs a lot more. I think Empire is my favorite. It's an absolute banger, and I love how they have Ramses singing in a super deep voice as well. While being an obvious riff on Empire's State of Mind, Boo York was still absolutely fire, and I love Seth's rapping. However, the Cleo and Deuce duet song, It Can't Be Over, was really hurt by the fact that they only had one male and female singer. The male singer sounds nothing like Deuce, and you know what, just roll the clip.
Look at us. This was never going to last. We're just too different.
What are you saying?
Look at you.
Side note, at the end of this movie, there's a post-credit scene where Astronova calls Raven and Apple from Ever After High. It was supposed to tease a crossover movie that never came to be due to Ever After High and G1's cancellation. It's a shame because I love both series, and it would have been cool to see them cross over. There is a book that did cross over the two series called The Legend of Shadow High, but that involves the book continuity of Ever After High and G2 of Monster High, so it's not exactly the same thing. Overall, Boo York is a movie that suffers from being overcrowded with too many characters and plot lines, but its music really pulls through to make the movie a fun time. Laguna has really bad stage fright, and Toralei uses this to embarrass her during the school play. Furious, Laguna blacklists Toralei from the play's after party, which causes the two to get into a fight. Falling into the pool, Toralei begins to get sucked up by a mysterious vortex. Laguna, Frankie, Draculaura, Claudine, and Gil try to save her, but get sucked into the vortex as well. They come out the other end, transformed into mermaids. I can't lie to y'all, I do not like this movie at all. There is a lot I dislike. For one, while I welcome the writers trying to give the characters more flaws and depth, Laguna's stage fright feels extremely out of nowhere. She's been shown performing just fine before. In fact, there's literally a whole webisode dedicated to Laguna auditioning on stage with Howleen, Rochelle, Rebecca, and Operetta. For her to suddenly have lifelong stage fright contradicts with these events heavily. This is likely a symptom of Monster High's struggle with and overall lack of continuity between projects. The books and diaries don't always line up with the specials, and the specials don't tend to line up with the webisodes. Another problem with this movie is the pacing. Once the ghouls get sucked into the vortex, the film just feels like it slows to a crawl. The time between then and when they get out is just so uninteresting to me. I was so bored. The only scene that caught my eye was the flashback sequence of Laguna's childhood. That scene was animated in 2D, something I greatly miss from these movies. Speaking of visuals, the rendering of the characters looked really weird when they were underwater. It felt very flat compared to the above water scenes, but in the darker underwater scenes, the lighting does look improved. In terms of new characters, I didn't care much for the newbies here. Perry and Pearl have cool designs and neat voices, but they didn't get to do much, and I straight dislike Kala. I don't like her design, and I found her motivations to be kinda weak. She's mad at the world for not accepting her cause her dad's a Kraken, so she decides to terrorize Monster High and bully Laguna. But Laguna tells her that Monster High accepts everyone, regardless of their flaws, and she's like, oh okay, I'm good now. Is having a scary dad really a flaw? I don't know, man. Something interesting in this movie as well is that Laguna got a new voice actor here. Up until this point, she was voiced by Laura Bailey, but here she's replaced by Larissa Gallagher, who does a good job and actually has an Australian accent compared to Laura Bailey. But still, the voice is different enough to where it's kind of distracting and it bothered me the whole movie.
Of course I'm jealous. Sorry. It's just Gil's parents would love it if he broke up with me and started dating a freshwater ghoul like Lorna.
You saw what happens? Anytime I dance in front of an audience, I freeze and go belly up.
Overall, Great Scarer Reef is a movie that I'm not fond of at all. I found the plot to be uninteresting with pacing that slowed the film to a crawl. It's really a shame that this is the last film before G1's cancellation, as it's not a very good note to go out on. And with that, our ranking is complete. With all the movies covered, let's recap our ranking. Number 13, Great Scarer Reef. Number 12, Escape from Skull Shores. Number 11, Fright On. Number 10, New Ghoul at School. Number 9, Scaris, City of Frights. Number 8, Ghouls Rule. Number 7, Boo York, Boo York. Number 6, Friday Night Frights. Number 5, Why Do Ghouls Fall in Love? Number 4, Frights Camera Action. Number 3, 13 Wishes. Number 2, Haunted. Number 1, Freaky Fusion. To sum up my thoughts on these movies as a whole, I'd say that this was a fun time. Monster High has an intriguing world with cool characters and spectacular designs. I mostly enjoyed my time with these movies, but I wouldn't say they're objectively good compared to actual movies. These are designed to sell dolls first and foremost, so the stories are centered around that rather than trying to tell a captivating narrative. It does try to do it sometimes, and it can succeed occasionally, but it often succumbs to the same faults that merchandise-driven media usually does. But even still, I enjoyed my time with these movies, and would recommend Monster High fans to check them out if you haven't already. If you enjoyed this video, or have any other thoughts on it, let me know down in the comments. And if there are any other topics you'd like me to cover, let me know as well. Thank you for watching, and stay spooky.
BRB!